Well, a very good morning to you, Landing Place. It is really, really good to have you here. If we've not had a chance to connect, my name is Mark, and we are in week 2 of a series entitled Love Like Jesus. We've tried to answer the question, what does it look like when the church leaves the building and goes out into our community, goes out into our workplaces and our schools, goes out into our neighborhoods? How do people know that we're connected to Jesus? I want to take you back to 2022. Just a few years ago. We're coming off the heels of COVID, and COVID has brought a lot of isolation. It's brought a lot of mental health issues. Anxiety is skyrocketing, depression is on the rise, even suicide. Alcohol sales have gone up by 4 times. People are not coping well with being isolated and being insulated from other people. So I began to pray with God, what are we going to do with this? There is a mental health crisis going on in our community, even in our church family. And what are we going to do about that? And God, as I've shared with you before, said, you're going to go back to school. And so I enrolled in Colorado Christian University in their master's in counseling program. I took a 2.5-year program and I spread it over 4 years to try to balance with my schedule. And God willing, this is the last year. By the end of this year, I'm hoping to actually come to the finish line and hit a completion point. So I think it's gonna happen at this stage. But I was taken aback the first year of classes. And now I've been in school, keep in mind, 35 years, right? Been a while since I picked up a textbook. One of my first classes was entitled Listening. There was a textbook, listening. There was podcasts on listening. There were YouTube videos we had to watch on listening. And I remember thinking to myself, do we really need 500 and 600 level, master's level classes on listening? I mean, it doesn't seem that complicated. But apparently we do. Do you know why? Because we're terrible listeners. The world has lost listening skills. And I thought, even through my lifetime, most of you will not be old enough to relate to some of these, but I remember in all of human history, I just want to look at the last 50 years. I'm old enough to remember black and white TV. Anybody black and white TV? Thank you, appreciate that. I remember when we only had 3 channels. I remember when you had to get up and go across the room to change said 3 channels. I remember holding to the aerial to be able to get reception for those 3 channels. All right? So fast forward, get through my childhood. I'm about in college when desktop computers come out. Whew. I had a Xeos, man. That was the bomb back in 1989. 2 megabytes of RAM. Said you'll never need more than that. And then there were a whole series of mobile devices. It started with the BlackBerry for me, and then went to iPhones and internet and the connectivity, and finally here we are at AI in a completely new realm. For all of human history, none of those things really existed until about 100 years ago or so. In the last 100 years, how we communicate as human beings has changed radically, and that's really important. Because somewhere along the line, and I love technology, so please don't hear this as a technology's bad, it's just changed things. But one of the things that's really changed is how we talk to people, how we communicate to people. And one of the things, the deficits that we're finding, and one of the reasons that mental health is going off the charts right now, on the heels of COVID and these years after, we have lost the ability to listen. Jesus understood something that would be very easy for us to miss. That when people feel listened to, they feel loved. When people feel listened to, they feel loved. Jesus talked about what should Christians, Jesus followers, look like when they step out of church buildings into communities. And our verse for this entire series takes us back to the book of John, where Jesus says this to his disciples. So now I'm giving you a new command. Love each other. Just as I, Jesus, have loved you, disciples, you should love each other. And in fact, it's your love for one another that's going to prove to the world that you're my disciples. Jesus said, it's not going to be how loud you talk when you leave this building. It's not going to be how right you are or even how offended you are. It's going to be how much you love people that is going to determine for people outside the church to know that you're connected to Jesus. Which is not exactly what we think. So last week, we opened this series by looking and asking the question, how did Jesus love? And maybe an auxiliary question, how do we love? I don't know about you, I can only speak for myself on this. I typically find it very easy to love people who are like me and who like me. I find them very easy to love. I'm like, how could you not love them? They're awesome. Jesus had this knack for finding the people who weren't like him and some people who didn't like him. And he engaged them in conversation. And we learned last week that love is inclusive. Jesus looked across busy crowds of people, and he found the one who was isolated. He found the one that was not connected. He found the one that was excluded, and he invited them in. And we learned that love is inclusive. But what do we do? What's the next step? What's the next logical step? As Jesus includes people who are excluded, the next step is love is listening. Jesus engages with conversation with these people, and he begins to listen to them. He begins to listen to their story before he ever preaches, before he ever heals, before he ever does anything else. Jesus' half-brother James said this. He said, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must, what's the next word? All. What does all mean? Are you all? Am I all? All. You must all be three things. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. This was written 2,000 years ago, and I don't think there could be a more relevant word for our culture today than this. Because when I look around the world, you know what I see? I see people who are very quick to speak. I see people who are very quick to post. I see people who get angry really quickly. I encourage you, take any social media post, any YouTube post, any newsfeed post, and look at the comments. And the most innocuous of posts, hey, what are King Soopers hours? By about the third post, you're going to find somebody that goes on a complete rant about something completely unrelated. We live in an angry culture where people are just looking. And James goes, you know what? For those of us who follow Jesus, we should be different. We shouldn't be like the world. We should be really quick to listen. We should be pretty slow to speak and to post. And we should be really slow to get angry. So today we're going to look at a story where Jesus, it's one of Jesus' longest encounters with another person, where we're going to see him love her through listening. We're going to read a big chunk of scripture today, almost an entire chapter of the Bible. It could be the longest single passage we've ever read in a weekend service, other than Pastor Eric shared the Christmas story. Even longer. And I know that as we go through 15 screens of scripture on the screens, it's going to be really easy for you to drift off. You know why? Because we stink at listening, right? We live in a fast-paced world. You get past the second slide and you're going, hey, I wonder what the Super Bowl party is going to look like this afternoon. I wonder what kind of dip she's going to bring, and I wonder if he's going to be double dipping today. I know where your mind goes. So here's what I'm asking of you today. I'm going to ask you to really put on your listening ears for a moment and really focus in. And I find that sometimes, because I can be a little bit ADD myself, I can be out there, I can have a lot of thoughts run through my mind and get distracted. I find sometimes it really helps me to put myself in the place that the story took place. So let me set the scene for you. We're in Israel. It's the Middle East. It is the middle of summer and it's super hot. It is noon. You are standing there in a desert and there's no one around, but there's a well and Jesus is standing beside the well. And he can't see you, but you can see him. And you get to be a fly on the wall of this interaction. And I want to encourage you to listen through this whole thing as an eavesdropper as we learn from Jesus. I'm going to pick it up in John 4. So Jesus left Judea and he returned to Galilee, and he had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well at noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Would you please give me a drink?" He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. Now the woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jesus said, "If only you knew the gift that God has for you and who you're speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water." "But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" Jesus said, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water that I offer will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water. I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." "Why don't you go and get your husband?" Jesus said. I don't have a husband," the woman replied. She didn't have a woman either, just to be really clear. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you've actually had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." "Sir," the woman said, "you must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it's right here at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshiped?" Jesus replied, "Believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans actually know little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him, because salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, and indeed, it's here now, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him in that way, for God is spirit. So those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said, "I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." And Jesus told her, "I am the Messiah." Then his disciples came back. They were shocked to find Jesus talking to the woman, but none of them had the nerve to ask, "What do you want with her? Why are you talking to her?" The woman left her jar beside the well, and she ran back into the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" And so people came streaming out from the village to see him. All right, let's get some context for this story. Jesus, let's put a map up. Jesus' hometown is Nazareth, which is just to the left of the Sea of Galilee in the north part of Israel. It's where he spends about 75% of his ministry time. On the southern part, down here by the Dead Sea, you'll see the city of Jerusalem. 3 times a year, there's a week-long festival for the Jews that everybody from the area comes to. And so it takes about 10 days to walk from Galilee all the way to Jerusalem. So 75% of the time, Jesus spends his time up in Galilee, and about 25% of the time, he's either going to Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, or coming back from Jerusalem. This is one of the cases where he's coming back from Jerusalem. Now, we need to understand a little bit about the people who inhabit these areas. You'll see Judea on the south, or Judah. You'll see Galilee in the north, both occupied by Jewish people. But you'll see this little nation right in the middle called Samaria. And you know what Samaria is full of? Samaritans. Now, in the 21st century Colorado, when you hear the word Samaritan, you automatically put a word in front of it. You put in front of it the word good. You all know that. It's amazing. You're Bible experts. Good Samaritan, right? We have Good Samaritan Hospital in Lafayette. Someone stops alongside the road and helps you change a tire. We say, wow, you are a good Samaritan. We have this beautiful, wonderful, awesome context around the word Samaritan. And that's only because Jesus told a story that Pastor Eric's going to share in a couple weeks. In Jesus' day, there was no such thing as a good Samaritan. Samaritans were a half-breed mix of people. The Assyrians had come in from the east and had intermixed with the Jews in Samaria and created a new race that was half Jewish and half Assyrian. And they weren't Jewish enough for the Jews to accept them, and they weren't Assyrian enough for the Assyrians to take them in. And they were hated by the Jews. And when I say hated, I mean they were hated. You'll notice there's a red line and a green line on the map. Most Jews hated Samaritans so much that they refused to walk through their land because they might encounter a dreaded Samaritan. To say that it was out of the way to go around Samaria is an understatement. That red line, which is hard for us to picture on this map, meant that you had to cross the Jordan River, go up the Jordan side of the river, and then cross the river again to get home. Now, there are no bridges, right? So this is not an easy task, but this is what most Jews do. But not Jesus. Jesus takes the green line. Jesus goes straightest distance, straightest way, quickest way to get there, straight line. I will go right through Samaria because Jesus was a barrier breaker. He broke down in this story every possible barrier known to man to have a conversation with a woman. Now they meet up at a place called Jacob's Well. This is really significant. This is a well that Jacob, we're talking way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, back 4,000 years ago, Jacob. A well that Jacob gave to Joseph. 4,000 years later, this well remains a staple in this area for fresh water. The village of Sychar is about 10 minutes outside of this well area. And when you tour Israel and you get a tour of these areas, they have what they call A sites, B sites, and C sites. A site is, this is exactly where a Bible story happened, in this place. We know that. B is, somewhere in this room, in this general area, this story happened. And C is, we're really not sure, but our best guess is here. Jacob's Well is an A site. Jacob's Well still exists. 6,000 years later, you can go to Israel, you can go into a Greek church, which they built over top of it, and you go down in the basement, and you will find Jacob's Well where Jesus stood. Because you know what? You can't move a well. It's stationary. It's one of the few places, and they will tell you in Israel, this is one of the few places we can say, exactly here. This is the hole. So they're at this well when there's this encounter, and as Jesus is standing there alone, hot summer day, this woman starts to make her way out of town. Keep in mind, there's no running water. They don't have the luxury of turning on a tap in their house. If you want water, you have to go to a well 10 minutes outside of town. You have to draw water to cook in, to bathe in, to drink. Every morning and every evening, women would come out of town. Women were the water bearers for whatever reason in their culture. They would come out early in the morning or late in the afternoon when the sun was either rising or setting in the cool part of the day. So as Jesus sees this woman approach, already there's whistles and bells going off in his mind saying, there's something really wrong with this picture. No woman comes out to fetch water in the middle of the day. They begin this conversation. In this conversation, Jesus breaks down every social rule and structure. Jewish men did not talk to women in public. Jews did not talk to Samaritans. And rabbis did not talk to people with checkered pasts. And Jesus destroys every barrier as he engages this woman. And this is not lost on her. She's as taken aback as anybody. So I want to look at three things that Jesus did and three principles that I believe that if we really want to show people love outside of the community of faith, why listening is such an important way to make it happen. First thing we learn in this story is that Jesus opens the conversation with vulnerability instead of authority. First thing out of his mouth as this woman approaches is, "Could you please get me a drink?" Now, we don't think much of that statement, but what Jesus is doing is he's actually posturing this entire conversation. First of all, she's taken aback that he's even addressing her and talking to her. But second, Jesus is actually humbling himself in this moment and saying, you know what? There's something that I need that only you could provide. I don't have a bucket. I don't have any way to get this water out of the well. And man, it would really be cool if I could get a drink from you. And that may seem like such a little thing, but it shows that Jesus exposes vulnerability. And he takes himself, because there is a huge, huge power differential between these two people. Jesus has all the power and all the privilege, and this woman has none of it. And so for someone of status and someone of a huge power differential lowers themselves to put on the same level and maybe even just a little lower and says, "Could I indulge you for a drink?" This woman actually literally is taken aback. We recognize it by her response. She said, "You're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink? You shouldn't even be talking to me." She's confused. And I think this matters to us deeply. I grew up in the church, and the church culture that I grew up in the late 1900s was this. We were called to witness. They really, really had the Great Commission dialed in. Go into the world, make disciples. They did not so much embrace the great commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so the concept was when you leave the building, you have the right answer and they have the wrong answer, and all you needed to convince them is how wrong they are and how right you are. And we were absolutely shocked when that didn't work. Well, I don't know what's going on. I tried, I went up and told them how wrong they were, how right I was, and I don't know, they didn't seem to be really receptive. So many people have walked away from church, not because they reject Jesus, because they reject the manner in which Christians portray Jesus. And I want you to notice that Jesus could have led with a lot of things. He could have led with Old Testament scripture. He could have led with a sermon. He could have led with so many ways, but he led with vulnerability. I think that's a really important key. The second thing we learned that Jesus did, he acknowledges her past without condemnation. As he begins talking and they begin talking about living water, Jesus says, "Hey, go get your husband." "Well, I got kind of a situationship going right now. I don't really have a current husband." And Jesus goes, "You're right. You've actually had 5 husbands, and the guy you're living with right now, he's not your husband either. You certainly spoke the truth." What we kind of expect to come after this is a lot of condemnation and a lot of, man, you need to clean your stuff up, and man, you need to get right or get left. We expect this kind of thing to transpire. But that's not how Jesus meets her. He meets her with love and compassion, and he listens to her story. Now, in a 21st century lens that we wear, you think about a woman who's been married 5 times and is currently living with somebody that's not her husband. What is the narrative you tell yourself about this woman? You don't need to say it out loud, but you have a narrative. Maybe you think she's promiscuous. Maybe you think she's really hard to get along with. She's a horrible wife. Maybe you think she's a terrible picker-outer. She makes terrible men choices in her life. She just keeps picking the same bad people over and over again. We have a narrative that we naturally assign to this story. What we miss is in her culture, none of those may be true. It could be that she was victimized a whole bunch. It could be that none of this was really her fault. We don't really know. But sometimes we automatically assume the worst, and Jesus didn't. He states the truth. He doesn't just leave it out there, but when he speaks to it, there's no condemnation. I want to hear your story. I think there's parts of this story we don't catch in Scripture. I think there's more words that were spoken. I think there's more story that's shared. But he opens the door for this woman to begin to share. And we know that she finds a safe place here, and we know that she feels heard and seen and loved because she doesn't run away. And she says, "Sir," the woman said, you must be a prophet. You know things that you would not know otherwise. And this opens up the conversation that once truth is out there, hey, there's some heartbreak going on in your life. There's been some hurt in your life. Man, you've been through some challenges in your life. Now, number 3, Jesus shares hope for the future. He comes back. He does not leave her in her hard story because he listened well, because she's opened up to him, because there's been some trust built. All of a sudden, he begins to share about living water. And he says, man, there's this water that I can offer you, and it's going to bubble up inside of you, and it's going to quench the deep, deep thirst you have, not the physical thirst, but the spiritual thirst that you've been dying for. And worship, we're arguing about where we worship and whether it's here in Mount Gerizim in Samaria or whether it's in Jerusalem. There's a day coming, it doesn't matter at all. Because it's a day we're going to worship in spirit and truth. And it's not going to matter where we're at or who we are. And guess what? You're invited into this. And this woman's going, oh, wow. Me? I'm invited into this? You're inviting me into this? And at this moment, this woman is overwhelmed. She says, well, someday the Messiah is going to come and explain all this to us. And when Jesus says, I am the Messiah, she realized that he just did tell her everything. And she drops and leaves her bucket. And she runs into town and says this. She said, come and see a man who's told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? I want you to remember, this woman has no standing in town. This woman has no friends in town. This woman, there's no reason anybody should believe this woman. But there's something so incredibly compelling about being with Jesus that the town comes out to the well. And Jesus stays in Sychar for days, and a revival starts in Samaria, a place hated, people excluded. Salvation comes to Samaria because of this one woman and because Jesus listened. Incredibly powerful. So, how do we apply any of this to our lives as we exit this building today and you go to Super Bowl parties and back to work tomorrow and into school? Like, what do we take from this? What do we learn from Jesus? And I would tell you there's 3 things that I just will highlight briefly. The first is, I think, is the power of asking questions before making statements. There's something very powerful about asking questions, and Jesus was a master question asker. He begins this conversation with a question. Can I get a drink of water? Oftentimes when Jesus was asked a question, he responded with a question. Because Jesus was way more concerned about hearing than being heard. He was quick to listen. He was slow to speak. The second thing, we want to listen without just planning our response. Most of the time when we're in conversation and somebody's talking, our natural thought process is, what am I going to say when they stop talking? I want to say something really smart. I don't want to sound stupid. I want to respond well. But we get so caught up in what we're going to say that we stop listening. And then we're confused when they stop because we're like, oh crap, I don't know where I'm at. One of the things they teach in counseling school in the whole first year is just how to really be present. And I'm realizing why you have to take a master's level course for both listening and to be present, because honestly, they're not really natural skills that most of us have. To really be fully present, to be really listening, to be really drinking in what somebody's saying as opposed to what we're about ready to say, so that they feel heard and understood. I will tell you, when people feel heard and understood, they feel loved. They really do. The third thing is we want to point them and share hope for the future. Jesus didn't get caught up in this woman's past. He really spent very little time processing her past. Instead, he redirected her to a better future. He said, your past is your past. But the truth is, your past doesn't have to be your future. There's living water in your future. There's the Spirit of God living inside of you, worshiping out of you in your future. And she's going, really? Me? So, in this story, I think all of us can identify with one of the two characters in the story. Today, for some of you, you may be the woman at the well. You may be that person today who feels like they're not really connected to the rest of the town. And there's been something that's gone on in your life that there's a lot of shame around, a lot of guilt around. Maybe you feel alone. Maybe you feel just excluded. Know that Jesus desires to hear your story. He's not afraid of it. He's not going to define you by your story. He's going to love you. And you can bring your story to him. For many of us, we're going to be Jesus in the story as we exit this building and we move into places that God has placed us. God has placed each one of us around people who may never actually come into a church building. The Great Commission is that the church moves out of the building into the places that God has created for you. And I almost promise you, if we open our eyes like Jesus did and we begin to look, I will bet this week you're going to cross paths with somebody who's like this woman, who's like Zacchaeus, who just needs someone to listen to them, to love them, to care about them. And I encourage us, this week we're going to have an opportunity to love like Jesus. And I suggest we really step into that and be very, very intentional. Because there was an entire nation that was changed over this encounter. And I think we underestimate the power of what one season of listening to somebody could do, not just for them, but the ripple effect that could have. Imagine if everybody at Landing Place Church had one person this week they listened to for a period of time. Think about the cumulative effect that could happen in the kingdom just by doing that. Jesus gave a reminder to us of how much he loves us. He loves us enough to include us. He loves enough us to listen to. On one of those festivals, when everyone went down to Jerusalem, was called the Festival of Passover. Jesus invited his disciples in to share the Passover meal together. And after the meal, on the night that he was betrayed and the night before he was crucified, he invited his 12 closest friends to share the Passover meal. This was not a stellar group of men. As Jesus invited them in, he knew that Judas would leave this dinner, immediately go out and sell him for 30 pieces of silver to the Pharisees. He knew that Peter, arguably his best friend, was going to deny in the next 24 hours that he knew Jesus, not once, not twice, but 3 times. He knew that as they left this room and he went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, and they came to arrest him, that these 12 closest friends that he'd poured into for 3 years were going to disappear on him and leave him. And he invited them in anyway. And he shared what we now call communion, or the Lord's Supper, with them. Today we celebrate communion as a church family, and it's really an invitation to come and sit with Jesus, to tell him our story, to be reminded that Jesus is just more than a great teacher and a great listener. He did something that no one throughout human history has ever done. He solved the sin problem. When he died on the cross, and when he came back to life 3 days later, it broke the power of sin in our lives. And now we have this ability to receive forgiveness freely and to enter a relationship with God. This is so important that Jesus never wanted us to forget So he gave us communion. And when you came in, you hopefully got a little element like this. If you did not, and you want to celebrate communion with us, just pop your hand up and we have ushers that'll bring it around to make sure you have one. I encourage you to peel back the top and you're going to find a little white wafer. This represents the bread that Jesus would have given out that night. Jesus took the bread and he broke it and he said, "Gentlemen, this is my body that's broken for you. I want you to take it and I want you to eat it. And I want you to remember the sacrifice that was made on your behalf because I love you this much." Let's take and eat the bread together. After they finished the bread, Jesus took a cup and he poured it out for each one of his disciples. He held it up. He said, "Gentlemen, this is the cup that represents my blood." They would have known throughout history that in order to atone or make right for sin, they would sacrifice animals. It was believed that the wages of sin is death, true, and the only way to pay for sin was through life, and life is in the blood. So they'd be sacrificing animals all the way up. And Jesus said, "Tomorrow," implied, "my blood will be shed, and it will be the final sacrifice. We will never need to sacrifice another animal to atone for sin, because my death will be the once and for all." He said, "I want you to take the cup. I want you to drink it. And remember that life is in the blood. And without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins." God, we're so grateful for this reminder of how much you love us. That you include everyone in this invitation to be in relationship with you, not because of anything that we've done, but because of what Jesus did on the cross. Jesus, thank you for modeling love so incredibly well to us through listening to this woman, through including those who felt excluded. God, I pray that as we leave this place, we would represent you well, that we would be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And that as we walk out of this place, that people will see such a love in us and how we love people. That they'll say, "You must have been with Jesus." God, will you give us strength? Will you give us opportunity? Will you give us courage to step into it?